Well, as it's famously noted, you don't get to pick your family, but you do get to pick your friends. Can't really help it if you might have, I don't know, off the top of my head, some kind of a son with a large drug problem who uses your influence to make millions of dollars from foreign governments. That's beyond your control. That's a blood tie. You can't really do much about that, but you can pick your friends. And we should be relieved to know that Joe Biden has set the standard for the giant unification of America that he's been talking about so steadfastly by picking a special economic advisor by the name of Joelle Gamble. Joelle Gamble is a rather young person and basically has been writing for a number of years. It basically says that capitalism needs to be reimagined. And I'm just going to use this as a launching pad. This is not about Joelle Gamble, but it is about Joe Biden, and it is about what is coming. For example, she talks about reimagining capitalism, reimagining it. I saw them reimagine Star Wars and Star Trek, and I haven't been impressed with that. But they want to reimagine capitalism, which means change it into something else. It can still be a powerful force for good, she says, but the current form of capitalism is fundamentally broken. And she goes on to say, this is Joe Biden's new special economic advisor, that our measure of economic security is based on white economic security, and that the injustices of capitalism have to be basically manipulated in order to stop money from doing what we all know money does, which is sniff out evil in the world and then run there as fast as it possibly can. Money will show up in your bank account, and if it doesn't smell evil, then it'll run someplace else. And my God, if it found out you were black, it'd be out of there like that. That's their understanding of money. Steve, this appointment of a person who has basically spent most of their very few years on the earth as a protege of what's his name? Pierre Omyidar, who's the founder of eBay, big leftist billionaire who spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on all kinds of things like the Lincoln Project and all the rest of these anti-freedom things that are always called the Democracy Project or something like that. Basically, my larger point is this. You can tell a lot about a person by the friends they keep. This is a person that Joe Biden has selected as a special economic advisor. She is virulently anti-capitalist. Now, whether or not he's going to listen to her advice, I don't think he's really listening to anybody's advice if you really want to know, but at this point, it doesn't really matter. The point is that this is a statement. This is a statement. This is not something that is just kind of happened. I am saying that my special economic advisor is going to be this young black woman who has written repeatedly about how capitalism has to be reformed in order to provide more economic justice. So that's something we should be worried about in this country, do you think?
Venezuela has economic justice. The people got exactly what they voted for.
Mm-hmm, they did.
That's economic justice.
And then they voted for it again, didn't they?
Yeah.
Although they used Dominion voting systems, so we're not entirely sure about that. But nevertheless.
Yeah. I'm going to go out on a limb here and stipulate. I do not accept. I merely stipulate for the sake of this argument that the election was fair and square and Joe Biden is the rightful president-elect. I still believe in my heart he's the alleged president-elect, and use means fair and foul to steal this election. But that said, he's stolen it fair and square, and we're probably stuck with him for 4 years. And when I say he stole it fair and square, I mean he stole it in such a way that it can't be undone before this SOB, this scheming mediocrity, this low-level Ayn Rand villain assumes office on January 20th. So the good news is people can learn from their election mistakes and vote the bastards out. The bad news is I don't know if we're gonna learn, that is. In my segment this week, I talked about how 1913 kind of ruined this country by putting in place the three institutions, the income tax, popular Senate, and the Fed, that have allowed the progressive, right and left progressive project to really take over this country. What I want to talk about in your segment is how we don't learn from this attempt to reimagine capitalism. It's not the first time we've done this. When FDR was elected president in 1932, we were in the midst of the Great Depression. Unemployment was hovering throughout like between 15 and 25% of the workforce out of work, depending on the year and what else was going on. And FDR, if we're going to borrow a phrase from Barack Obama, inherited a mess. Not only did we have the financial collapse in 1929, but everything Herbert Hoover did was wrong. And FDR ran against everything Herbert Hoover did. And then when he got into office, proceeded to double down on everything Herbert Hoover did. And there were a pair of UCLA economists, both left-leaning, who back about 15 years ago published a study that they'd written that the New Deal, that FDR's policies to fight the Great Depression and to provide relief to those unemployed Americans, 15 to 25% of the workforce, actually extended the Great Depression by 7 years. 7 years. This is almost unimaginable. The only thing that stopped the Great Depression was World War II. And the only reason we didn't go right back into a depression is FDR, that son of a bitch, finally died. And his New Deal is his war on business, his war on capitalism, his attempt to reimagine capitalism finally came to an end. We got a decent Missouri guy, Harry S. Truman, into the White House and brought a stop to that nonsense. And we're still stuck with all the welfare spending and all that, but at least Truman ended the war on capitalism. He ended the reimagining of capitalism. But that's the point is that it was happenstance that got us out of that mess. It was the attack on Pearl Harbor that got us out of that happenstance. It was FDR finally kicking off that ended that happenstance. But the political reality is that the guy who ruined this economy, who reimagined capitalism and put a quarter of the population into misery for 7 years longer than they needed to be in that misery, that man was elected to the highest office in the land, an unprecedented 4 times. So it's not so much I worry that idiots get elected. It's that I worry that when you've got the media on your side, that we will learn as a people the wrong lessons from those idiots.
Well, you say that, we'll vote those bastards out. I personally think we did vote those bastards out, but that's a story for another time.
Yeah.
Scott, I have maintained for the longest time that the reason that these communists and socialists are so popular and people are even listening to them at all is because they are trumpeting their socialism in the middle of a capitalist country, and that they are able to be surrounded by the wealth and the prosperity of a capitalist country. And they can talk about this swell idea about how, well, geez, if everybody's got everything now, just think how great socialism will be when everybody is rich. And unfortunately, what turns out in history is that when you make everybody equal, you can't run faster than the slowest runner in the race. If you're going to have everybody cross the finish line at the same time, socialism fails because it has to operate at the speed of the slowest runner. It slows everybody down to that rate. I personally think that if they're going to do this, what they certainly clearly are intending to do, I think it should happen as quickly as possible and as dramatically as possible. My enormous fear, and I'm filled with a lot of worries these days, is that they'll take 7 or 8 years to do this and people won't even notice it. But what do you think of this idea that this socialism sounds so wonderful? Let me I'll just wrap this up. I'm sorry, I got completely confused. I think the only way to get people to get out of the idea of socialism is to give it to them.
And I think that's probably accurate, although I shudder at the thought. When you first said this during our backstage episode that's available to our members at BillWhittle.com, I remember thinking at that time, if we hadn't fought Barack Obama and said, go ahead, nationalize healthcare, take it now, then we wouldn't have had the years of sort of incrementally adjusting to the concept that the federal government has an increasing hand in our healthcare decisions. And in a way, by blocking some of the more outrageous or extreme measures that the Democrats had dreamed up at that time and had been hoping for years, the Republicans, rather than saving us from it, ensured its persistence, ensured that it would survive and go on forever, because essentially we became accustomed to it because it wasn't extreme up front. And so we were able to incorporate it into our daily lives and not be shocked. There's an old expression from, I think it was Nicholas Negroponte Escalante at MIT, who said incrementalism is death. And it is a very slow death over a long period of time, but it's a certain death because you never realize that you're being killed until it's too late. And so, yeah, I think it would be a good idea in a sense to say, okay, you've got competing economic theories. Let's put them into practice right now. Go ahead. We're not going to vote for it, but if you have the votes to pull this off, do it. I'm all for reimagining capitalism, by the way. I would like to reimagine the relationship of government to free markets. I think that the part of the biggest challenges and the unfairnesses, so-called, generated by so-called capitalism have nothing to do with genuine free markets where many, many individuals are allowed to make individual decisions in their own best interest and that overall tends toward the good of the whole society. The reason why capitalism has struggled of late is not because of capitalism. It's because capitalism or free markets have been hindered in their operations by the actions of government. I think, it's funny, the progressives and the people like this, Joelle Gamble, they understand something that conservatives have yet to figure out. They understand primal human motivations, greed and envy, masked with a patina of fairness. So in reality, what they call fairness, and they say it's not right that somebody should have a lot and you should have a little, what they're really doing is saying, don't you want that? Don't you want exactly what we say is the greatest evil ever? And if you can't have it, well, then nobody should have it. And that is really the motivation. They have tapped into a primal, frankly, sinful motivation of the human heart that says, I want things that I didn't legitimately earn if somebody else has them. I need to have that, and I'm not willing to explore or put forth the effort that it takes to get that kind of thing. Now, I'm not saying any of this in reference to race because I think that that's a false, that's kind of a card that they're playing to make it look like this is really about racism when it's really about a fundamental view of economics. I do want the government to get the heck out of the way of people of color who are living in America's cities who, for some reason, even though their per pupil funding is equal at the federal level and equal at the state level, cannot be equalized at the local level enough to rescue them from these failure factories that are producing generation after generation of people who come out illiterate and are unable to even get into a decent community college. If you want to get out of the way of free markets or reimagine capitalism, for example, how about an education system in America's inner cities that are utterly run by Democrats and controlled by the federal government that allows people an opportunity to have a head start, a leg up? They say it's a head start, a leg up in the sense that you're intellectually prepared to be able to present yourself in the marketplace.
This is the whole thing. It's a scam, and it's probably the great scam in history. And Scott's right. It appeals to these fundamental, primal, very powerful human emotions, and they are envy and greed. And the reason people are able to get so enthusiastic about it is they're told that if you go for this envy and greed philosophy will actually do good for those in need. So you get to be virtuous on top of it. It's like a little spoonful of sugar that helps the horrible medicine goes down. But here's the thing, folks. This is why socialism doesn't work anywhere. We've said it all our lives. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Well, they didn't do it right. They didn't do it right. No, they did it exactly right. And the reason that it doesn't work is because the people who do the producing are not going to produce forever. They're not going to become just a food source. They will produce, and we will run businesses, and everybody will prosper and everybody will succeed and all boats will rise. But if this kind of thing, if this kind of economic advisor and this kind of economic policies come to pass in this country, and that certainly looks like that's going to be the case, then we will simply stop doing that and we will just do the minimum. And that's what socialism is everywhere in the world. The other great line from the Soviet Union is, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. And that's what we will get. And if we're going to get that, then I think we ought to get it as quickly and as dramatically as possible. I think it needs to be a shock to the system. I think if this is going to happen and it's no longer preventable through the ballot box because that's been corrupted too, then if that's where we are, and it seems to be where we are, then I say bring it as fast and as hard as you can. And this time, Those of us that do the working and the tax paying and keep things float and running, we take care of ourselves. We should let this thing crash and burn. We should encourage it to crash and burn and take care of the people that understand these core principles that this country is founded on. And we should accelerate this catastrophe that they are putting onto us from above. And we need to protect the people that understand it's a catastrophe, because if we don't do this, these people will continue to vote for this until they are in such a place that there's no more voting to be done. And I don't want this country to get to that state. I'm sick enough of what I've seen already. So for Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. We'll see you next week right here on Right Angle.